Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the echoes of an empire. We're looking at the staggering scale of pre-Columbian civilizations right here in North America. Now, when we think of monumental ancient history in the Americas, our minds almost automatically jump to the Aztecs or the Incas, right? But long before those empires hit their peak, North America was already absolutely teeming with these massive, incredibly complex urban centers. We're talking about a history defined by ambitious engineering, vast political power, and literally continent-spanning economies. It's the kind of stuff that really challenges everything we assume about the ancient landscape of this continent.
So where did the ancient Americans actually go? It's honestly one of the most enduring historical mysteries out there. For centuries, early European settlers, and honestly even later archaeologists, operated under this really popular, almost mythic misconception. They thought these massive, bustling civilizations just vanished. Poof, without a trace, wiped off the map overnight. And hey, it makes for a great, spooky campfire story, right? This idea of an entire empire just swallowed by the earth. But actually the truth is way more fascinating. It's not a story of some spontaneous vanishing act. It's a deeply human story of intense environmental pressure and deliberate, strategic survival.
Okay, let's really dive into this. The reality is that this continent was comprehensively transformed long before European contact. What we're looking at was a thriving, interconnected continental hub. These were permanent, densely populated agricultural settlements, and they were kept alive by massive yields of maize and super complex irrigation systems. And their trade networks, they were basically a transcontinental highway system. Archaeologists have dug up copper mined from the Great Lakes, glittering mica from the Appalachians, marine shells all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, all buried together in single spots thousands of miles from where they originated. So ideas, religion, luxury goods, they were all flowing across North America in this vast, highly organized web.
Which brings us to our first major focus. Section 1, the metropolis of Cahokia, and its power on the Mississippi.
The sheer scale of Cahokia is just absolutely staggering. At its peak in the 11th century, this dense urban center had a population of around 20,000 people. Just to put that into perspective for a second, Cahokia was actually larger than medieval London was at the exact same time. Now, I want you to imagine standing at the very bottom of Monk's Mound, which was the absolute centerpiece of this metropolis. Its footprint is literally larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And get this, it required moving millions of baskets of earth entirely by hand. Around this colossal structure, the city was just buzzing. You'd see a sprawling, artificially leveled grand plaza completely packed with farmers, highly skilled craftsmen shaping flint and copper, and traders who had traveled 1,000 miles just to get there. And overseeing all this immense kinetic energy was a hierarchy of powerful leaders who managed a society that was far more complex and politically centralized than most folks realize.
Moving out west, let's look at Section 2, the enigma of Chaco Canyon and the ancestral Puebloans of the Southwest.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast between the environments these empires conquered. Completely different landscapes yielded equally magnificent but totally distinct ancient cities. In the river valleys of Cahokia, society was built on timber and earth, fueled by those rich, reliable Mississippi waters. But, building with timber requires massive deforestation, which ultimately leaves the city super vulnerable to catastrophic flooding. Contrast that with the desert canyons of Chaco. Out there, the ancestral Puebloans built entirely out of quarried stone and mortar, completely mastering an incredibly arid landscape. But the reliance on really specific seasonal rain patterns, that left them extraordinarily vulnerable to prolonged drought. So two totally different landscapes, two brilliant architectural solutions, but each carrying the seeds of its own unique vulnerability. Chaco's masterful design is, honestly, nothing short of engineering genius. In an environment that seems almost hostile to human life, they built these magnificent great houses. The largest one, Pueblo Bonito, was a multi-story, D-shaped structure with over 600 rooms that required hauling hundreds of thousands of massive timber beams by hand from mountain ranges over 50 miles away. No wheels, no beasts of burden. But here's perhaps the most surprising fact. Their architecture shows a profound, almost mathematical understanding of astrophysics. Entire buildings and specific windows were meticulously aligned to capture the exact sunrise of the winter and summer solstices, not to mention complex lunar cycles that only happen every 18.6 years. They basically turned a harsh, dry desert into this thriving, cosmically aligned hub.
So that brings us to Section 3. Why did they leave? The Great Migration. So what exactly caused the decline of these magnificent power centers? Let's take a look at the timeline. In the 1100s, these urban centers were at the absolute height of their power and expansion. Things were booming, but moving into the late 12th century, communities began to fracture and migrate. By the early 13th century, major settlements in places like the Chaco region were quietly unoccupied, and the archaeological record here is just fascinating. This was definitely not some chaotic, panicked flight from an invading army. Actually, scratch that. It was the exact opposite. Hearths were swept clean, doorways were carefully sealed up with stone, valuable, sacred items were intentionally left behind in very specific alignments. It was a gradual, deliberate, and highly organized relocation away from the megacenters.
Basically, it was a perfect storm of environmental pressures. Over in Cahokia, sediment layers revealed that massive deforestation, from cutting down millions of trees for building and fuel, that led to devastating, uncontrollable flooding that totally destroyed their crop yields. Meanwhile, in the southwest, modern tree ring data confirms the onset of severe, decades-long megadroughts. The predictable rains just completely stopped, and when you add broader climate shifts into that mix, the result is inevitable: profound social and political instability. The leaders of these cities usually derive their power from their perceived ability to commune with the gods and control the weather. Well, when the rains fail or floods destroy the harvest, that political and religious authority completely collapses.
Which leads us to Section 4, Adaptation, not Disappearance. The big paradigm shift.
There's a saying among historians that carries immense weight here. It goes, "When we see an abandoned city, we often imagine that an entire people vanished. But history is rarely that simple. Equating an empty, silent city with an extinct people just completely misses the reality of human civilization. I mean, think about modern industrial cities that see massive population exoduses when a major industry collapses. The city might empty out, sure, but the people don't vanish from the earth. They simply pack up and move to where the resources are. And the ancient Americans, they did exactly the same thing." What we're looking at is a highly predictable cycle of adaptation. First, a complex civilization relies deeply on the specific conditions of its land. But when those vital environmental systems, the climate, the rainfall, the soil integrity, when these inevitably shift, the society simply cannot remain static. That pressure forces a cultural transformation. The people migrate, often breaking down into smaller, more sustainable clans. And that leads to the final step of the cycle: new beginnings. Migration forces different groups to merge, sharing knowledge and creating entirely new cultural identities in different, more hospitable environments. Because their connection to the earth was so absolute, when the land changed, the people intelligently adapted right along with it.
If you take nothing else away from this explainer, let it be this: their descendants are still here. The people never vanished at all. They moved, their traditions evolved, and those cultures survived and absolutely continue to thrive today. The brilliant builders of Chaco Canyon, they are the direct ancestors of modern Puebloan peoples, including the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Rio Grande Pueblos. The architects of Cahokia are woven right into the ancestry of numerous Native American nations across the modern Southeast and Midwest. Their legacy is alive and well and deeply ingrained in ascendant communities today. So what looked to early historians like this tragic ending was really just a strategic new beginning.
Which leaves us with one final, provocative question. Were these civilizations truly lost, or have we simply forgotten how to recognize the world they left behind? Today, modern tech like LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar are literally stripping away centuries of forest and farmland to reveal these hidden metropolises right beneath our feet. The remains of these incredible, ancient worlds are still out there, just waiting in the quiet landscapes of North America. They had this brilliant story of resiliency to tell us. We just need to shift our perspective and finally listen. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep exploring the deep history that's right beneath your feet.